Chapter 16. They Never Look Back. July 1856. Ma fixed a picnic. There's a generous breeze today for July. Let's have a family day out of doors. But James knew the real reason. Ma was getting them out. Miss Lisbeth had been holed up in that little room a day and a half, and it had no window for air or light. Once they were in the wagon, Miss Lisbeth could come out, have a bath, grab armfuls of fresh air, and be gone again to Missouri to fetch another group of fugitives. At Quail Feather Creek, Pa sprawled on a blanket, Rebecca joggling on his belly. Ma bustled around, packing up the chicken bones and dirty plates and cups, shaking out crumbs, folding the tablecloth. The sun rose to its highest overhead peak, so bright orange that James couldn't look too long. It's almost too hot to be out here, Pa said, so Ma fanned him with the hem of her skirt. Watch thee doesn't show too much of thy bloomers, Pa teased. Honestly, Caleb, these incorrigible. James listened to them as he flopped onto his belly, with a slack line lazily hanging into the creek. Maybe something would bite besides mosquitoes, and maybe it wouldn't. Sit a minute, Millicent. Thee's buzzing like a queen bee. Ouch, Rebecca, thee mustn't bounce so hard. I'm not a feather bed or a stack of hay. Go jump on thy brother's back. Pa! Stay where thee is, little kitten, but purr soft a while. Rebecca feigned a purr that sounded like the roar of a steamboat. Caleb, Ma said, and James feared something serious was coming to break the spell of the carefree afternoon. He glanced back and saw her take Pa's hand in her lap. About the Negroes. Pa put his finger on Ma's lips. Ma wisely changed the subject. I've brought along a peach shortcake to take to the Olneys. Maybe we should start out for their place. Dr. Olney had just brought his family out from Boston because all the warring and burning had left so many people injured. James couldn't remember meeting the Olneys in Boston. He would have remembered a bald elf like Dr. Olney and his wife, whose chins ruffled on her chest. As soon as Ma turned over the peach shortcake, would they offer some before the afternoon was out? Rebecca asked, Does thee have any little girls to play with? Not as big as thee or as pretty, Mrs. Olney said, but we have a pink round baby girl. Come, I'll show her to you. Rebecca and the women went inside gleefully. Ma called from the porch, James, does thee want to see Olney's baby? Maybe later, Ma. Now, if it had been a rattler or a 30-pound tomato or a 2-headed calf that Mrs. Olney was showing off, he'd have gone to have a look. But a baby wasn't worth trudging through the house for. James stayed outside with the men, who didn't seem to notice that he was there at all. Thunder had been unhitched from the wagon and was being watered by a man whose skin glistened with sweat like the horse's hide. In fact, he and the horse were nearly the same golden-brown color. Thank thee for looking after the horse, Solomon, said Dr. Olney. She could use a bit of cold water on her back, I suspect. James drew a castle in the dirt while the men talked about the orchestra in Boston, about a senator named Stephen Douglas, who was still stirring up a nest of vipers with his talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Compromise. A pile of wood lay nearby, with an axe sticking out of its flesh. James longed to sling that axe and split the logs, anything for some action, while the men's voices droned in talk, talk, talk. Here came a man on horseback, and Thunder didn't like him a bit. She started dancing nervously and slapping the ground with her shoe. The Negro man, Solomon, looked up, and all at once it seemed to still, sluggish afternoon and turned to raging waters. It seemed the still sluggish afternoon had turned to raging waters. The man dismounted and seemed as tall as his horse. On his head slouched a sweat-ringed hat with a toothless feather stuck in it, and a bowie knife showing out the top of his boot. His carbine was slung over the ribs of the scrawny horse, his voice dusty and dry. He asked, You the slave Deacon Barclay Master's Edwin Barclay of Macon, Georgia? No, sir, I'm a free man. Got papers to prove it. Thee is on my property, friend. Dr. Olney stood right up to the man, though he was about half the tyrant's size. Does thee have a warrant for the arrest of this man? Pa asked. I don't need no warrant. He took a paper out of his saddlebag and snapped it to Solomon's face. This here gives me all the authority I need to take Deacon back to Georgia. Friend, Dr. Olney said, this man is Solomon Jefferson, and he came with my family from Boston. He's been free since he was a boy. Paper says otherwise. Pa pulled out his spectacles. May I see it? No, sir. I ain't falling for no tricks like y'all tearing it up or tossing it in the horse's trough. His horse drank greedily from that trough now. James looked at Solomon to gauge how much fight was in him. He followed Solomon's eyes to the axe in the wood pile. The handle faced Solomon. So close, so easy. The slave trader said, Got me something else in my saddlebag. He yanked it out of his bag. Brand new forged Smith & Wesson. James lurched forward as the man pulled the gun on Pa's head. All I want's the Negro. I can get me $500 for him. The rest of you's not worth a bucket of spit. Stay clear, James, Pa said, his voice strung tight. James stared at the gun aimed at Pa's face and saw Pa ease into prayer. Imagined him saying, Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. That's when he realized what he could do. He stepped between the slave catcher and Solomon, just long enough to let Solomon snatch up that axe. Then James jumped out of the way. Solomon's mighty arm raised that axe into the air. It could have come down on the man's head, could have split him right in two like a thick log, but Solomon had lived among Quakers too long. Dr. Olney, he cried out, shall I let the axe fall? No, Dr. Olney and Pa shouted it together. And Solomon, the free man, dropped the axe to the ground and was a slave once more. Now Solomon's hands were tied in front of him with a rope that was also wound around his neck. The slave catcher had a good hold on the end of the rope. James was embarrassed to look at Solomon. He thought he'd be so dispirited as Thunder was when they first broke her. But instead, James read something else in the man's dark face, triumph. Thee goes with God. I believe so, Dr. Olney. God bless. Pa said, I'll do everything I can to get thee out again. Thee has my word, friend. The man yanked on the rope, and Solomon stumbled. Thee means for him to walk? Dr. Olney asked. The slave catcher's laugh was dry and coarse. Only got the one horse. I ain't walking, and I sure ain't riding cheek to yowl with no Negro. Wait, Pa led Thunder back, and Dr. Olney fetched the saddle. The two of them gently lifted Solomon to the horse, so as not to pull the ropes too tight. Thunder was used to pull a wagon, and she looked surprised when the weight of the man fell upon her back. But she trotted on behind the other horse. Neither Thunder nor Solomon ever looked back.